Hi, my name is Rae, and I'm with Mateo, and we're going to be talking about trivialization and romanticization about mental health illness on social media. So, Mateo, how exactly do you see this in your personal experience?
Yeah. Well, honestly, definitely from my personal experience, and especially on social media, you see a lot of references to ADHD. I was diagnosed with it about a year and a half ago, and it's been a kind of interesting road now seeing how it's represented in social media. Oftentimes, there's this kind of like idea of it being of like all of like basic ADHD symptoms really being kind of quirks, or it's like, oh, I can't pay attention. Look at me, like, and things that I've seen that on TikTok before a lot of the time, where it's like, oh, like my ADHD distracted me, when it's not really that. Like, and that kind of shows how people don't really know what ADHD really is. Especially because some of those things can really be really hard to deal with, like in terms of that not paying attention thing. It's not that you can't pay attention; it's that you're paying attention to almost everything at the same time. So you're always at some point, looking at something or distracted by something, and that can be kind of hard, especially when you have no control of it. Um, Other things like like hyperactivity. Like sometimes you can really feel either like super lazy and you really can't even get up, or you're just on Zooms. And sometimes people have to kind of tell you like, hey man, like you're really perked up right now. Like, why don't you, take a break? And I've had to deal with that a couple of times, and that can be really difficult to distinguish and figure out, especially just because a lot of those symptoms that people with ADHD deal with are things that break a lot of social norms, especially in traditional American culture. Things like not waiting your turn, speaking out loud, kind of just necessarily just kind of some of those traits, although they're symptoms of larger things going on in your mind, to people can seem, it's easy for people to kind of dismiss them, or I've had those experiences where I'm trying to tell people, about my day and how it was hard for me to get up and things like that, and their response is like always like, well, everyone deals with that, you just need to work through it. Everyone, doesn't want to do stuff sometimes, but then it's trying to get them to understand that like thinking about having to do those things at the beginning of my day can really make it hard for me to even start it, you know, because there's this sort of anxiety and this fear of messing things up. Because definitely people with ADHD deal with that. It's called a rejective sensitive dysphoria, and it's really representative in just your reaction to a lot of things more than how you're being proactive. So a lot of these responses make it hard for you to really just kind of like talk it out, and especially a lot of that kind of this twisting of what ADHD really is in terms of the perception of it online can actually make it harder for people, like in terms of getting medications for it, right? Like when I originally started to get on the path to it, that was actually really difficult because as a college student and you're going and asking for ADHD medications, a common one is Adderall, and it's misused a lot in college. They're infamous for that. So definitely, like just being a young student, especially of color, can make it really difficult to get that information and to get those kinds of real access, because a lot of doctors are just going to think, oh, well, he's just another college student that wants to get Adderall, and you know, trying to explain to other people too that like that thing doesn't actually do the same thing for me as it would for other people. Um, all those things kind of make it really hard for you to feel valid, you know. And I think more than anything, people with mental illnesses want their experiences to feel real. They want other people to know that what they're dealing with every day is a symptom of kind of their own experience, the way their mind works. And I think that's like important when we're on social media and we're talking about mental illnesses and kind of joke around, oh, I'm anxious today, or oh, I'm depressed. I think it's important to take a step back and kind of think about those are real things that in people's lives they really have trouble a lot changing, or oftentimes can't change. So yeah, definitely just my little part about it from my perspective is kind of being neurodivergent. But I also understand that there's a lot of different concepts and a lot of different ways to go around it. Especially I understand that eating disorders and just the way your body image is definitely a way of how it can is another option of social, how social media can affect the way we look at it. So I definitely want to ask you, Rae, like, have you ever noticed anything in that subject of eating disorders and like body image, how it works? Because I don't have a lot of like information on it. So if you could
Mhm.
just comment on that, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, of course. Like with any other type of mental illness and just any type of problem concerning that, there's a lot of just like the stigma and then also the desensitization in our language and even in our body language as well. So
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, whenever I go on social media and even when I was growing up, I've dealt a lot with eating disorders and even just body image in general. And in my experience, I feel that the language that we use, even up to today, it is basically desensitizing everything. And an example of that would be, for example, if somebody said that, like casually, if someone casually says, oh, like she's really skinny, or I feel kind of fat, like that type of language isn't really helpful, because there's actually actual people there that are struggling with the fact that they are feeling fat, and which eventually leads to eating disorders. And I feel that it's also romanticized in a way also, because everybody wants to, I don't know, I feel like lately nowadays a lot of people have been having this urge to feel like there's something wrong with them. I don't know how to explain it, but
Yeah.
like
Sorry, no, real quick. I asked this question because you were on this really good point too.
Mhm.
We're talking about trivialization. Do you think that when people kind of trivialize a lot of this stuff, or they're really just kind of outward with their body image language
Mhm.
use, you know what I mean? They're very just kind of gung ho with it. Do you
Mhm.
think that's from a lack of understanding of another person's experience and they're just kind of, oh, whatever? Or is it a fear of that experience and a fear if that person could deal with that
Mhm.
experience? Like, do you think it's that's where it comes from?
That's actually a good question. I feel like it could be a mixture of both, because I do feel like a lot of us are ignorant,
Mhm,
because especially coming from me and your experience with ADHD,
mhm,
I my whole entire life I've struggled with understanding what ADHD was, and I didn't actually start researching and learning about it until I've actually had people in my life that has severe ADHD, and I realized how bad it affects relationships and how bad it affects one's way of living, because they have this different sort of mentality and a different sort of way of doing things.
mhm,
And I feel like the ignorance that people have when it comes to certain mental health illnesses or disorders, or even I feel like just the ignorance in general creates fear. That's what I believe. So I feel like a mixture of people wanting to claim that they have this or that could be a mixture of like paranoia, and then also ignorance because they don't know the whole entire thing or the whole entire symptoms of the said disorder that they're trying to say that they have. And I feel like that's really problematic. And I feel like, in a way, our education system doesn't really prioritize mental health illness to the point where they teach us what exactly is ADHD, what exactly is body dysmorphia, what exactly is bulimia nervosa, you know?
mhm.
And
Why do you think it's harder to do that? Like, why do you think it's harder? Because we're kind of taught about the way the planets work when we're in fifth grade,
mhm,
or how the Earth works. These really big kind of just concepts that are probably hard to like for a little kid to handle. But like, how do you think? Like, why do you think that mental health is not something that we're actually educated by, even though it's a field that's got more than a
mhm.
few years underneath its belt at this point?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like as the generations continue replacing each other in a way where eventually we're adults and we are getting our education to eventually become leaders of the world, essentially. So I feel like, because in the past, especially when I was growing up, and of course our other peers growing up, we
Mhm,
experience a lot of shame and guilt and just stigma in general when it comes to mental health and a lot of other topics. And because of that, we were taught to never talk about those things.
mhm,
And because we were taught to never talk about those things, I would say that in my experience, looking at the adults in my life, they found it that, oh, I wasn't experiencing any of those problems. There's no point in teaching me about those things.
yeah.
And I feel like because we are growing up and replacing the leaders with our own generation people, we are starting to recognize that these type of information is very essential to teach, because there's a bunch of people that are suffering with different types of mental health illness. And of course, through that process of what we're doing, there's a lot of ups and downs, which is why we're talking about trivialization and also romanticization. And it's just a matter of teaching people, showing them what's the proper way of using language, showing them what exactly is this or that.
Hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I didn't think I understand that because, like, at least from my point of view, when I was super young and I would try to tell like my family about some of the things that I was dealing with, I got shot down a lot and gaslighted sometimes.
Mhm,
And just because mostly like not because they were hateful about it, just because they, weren't really sure about it
mhm,
and they really didn't know how to handle it. And, at a young age, either I didn't know either. So there was a lot of pressure, at least for me, to figure it out for myself. I think that's like a large part of why I chose psychology as my major was part of it. I think a part of a lot of people's reasons to be a psychology major is you have something that you would like to learn about yourself. And I knew that even from a young age that I was doing a lot of masking, a lot of hiding my symptoms, right?
mhm,
And just because even though I didn't know that I had ADHD, I knew that there were some things that I was doing that were getting me a negative reaction.
mhm,
And so I learned how to hide all that stuff. And now that I'm older and now that I'm a little more educated and it's a little bit easier for me to kind of be open, even though it's still tough, like when certain things happen and my mom might say something, instead of being angry or holding it against her or just, trying to hide the fact that the way I felt, I kind of would stop the conversation and say, hey, like this, like that hurt my feelings, like the way that you said
mhm,
that. And I know that you didn't mean it, and I understand that that's not your intention, but I want to let you know that that's how I feel. And if we could change the way we use our words when we're on this subject, it would help a lot. And that took a lot of growing up and a lot of just like, bad arguments to get to a couple good ones where they work. And I think it really just comes from me having to constantly explain my experience to my mom.
mhm,
And like, it goes back to what you're talking about teaching, where I didn't realize it, but I was teaching my mom a lot about that stuff, where simultaneously I'm coming home and telling her these things I'm learning about myself, but I also have to have it delivered very, very carefully because it's also teaching her in a way. And I
mhm,
think that's what's hard thing for me was when I first started to discuss medications and things like that, my mom didn't really understand it. And she was worried about, like, and this is kind of what happens when people aren't really taught about medications at a young age is she was afraid of me being somehow addicted to them or things like that. And that was hard for me to explain that, like, these are some things that your brain should get used to having if, you don't have them, but like, that's a lot of like, that's all that some people know about that kind of stuff is,
mhm,
oh, especially for people in certain communities where we don't there's a lot of distrust between people and the medical field
mhm,
just in general, just doctors, anything like that. It makes it hard for people to go get help. That's why a lot of people are dealing with some kind of sicknesses for years on end because they just don't go to the doctors. And it's just because a lot of it can be just like misinformation, and some of it's just maybe stubbornness, but I also think it has to do with just not knowing better.
mhm,
And usually when a lot of the things that these people have in common is just sticking it out, and just getting through it, just dealing with it. And that was something that I had to teach, that I thought that I had to do at a young age, where I was like, I'm not gonna let this stuff bug me. And then a couple months later, I'm upset, and I'm still upset about the thing that happened a couple months ago, but
mhm,
I never dealt with it.
mhm,
And that was a lot of the work that I did to kind of talk to my family about how my ADHD works. Because definitely and what they were communicating to me, sometimes it feels like I would walk into a room and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is the reason I have it. You can't tell me I was doing it wrong. And it was an interesting perspective to get because at first I thought that they were just kind of trivializing it. Like, you don't, you still need to work at it. You still need to not do these things. But it was also like, I realized that they were just what they were trying to say is they wanted me to not simply that they didn't want to just have to deal with it. If that makes any sense. And that's definitely a step that I had to take back and realize that like when I'm declaring those things, it's not because I'm trying to use it against them or trying to have an excuse. It's because it's a real part of my experience that I denied for years. And now I'm working on making sure that other people see it because I had problems seeing it. Um, so, I think that's definitely an important part whenever you're discussing, trivialization and romanticization of mental illnesses is definitely just communicating that experience because that's really the purest way you can do it is because I could give you, statistics about how people feel and I could give you, the DSM, the definitions of all these things, but it's not going to effectively communicate something that is just, you have to talk about it and you have to hear people about it because I think it's important for you to really understand if something, especially because like I don't know, I might be skipping on subject right now, but honestly, like it was important for me at a young age or at a certain time when I was healing with those ADHD stuff to go and read and listen to other TED Talks about it or people speaking about it. And it's not even just like if you don't have it, you know, if you think you're having it, some people might really be having some stuff, and they would do the thing that I would do, which is I would be on social media and I would be on TikTok, and I would see an ADHD thing and I would laugh about it, and it would just like, you know, it would be something about their experience, like, oh, you know, ADHD made me do this, and but it was really from people who had ADHD, so it was actually really healthy, which is something that we can talk about later. It's how to promote healthiness, but like I would read it and sometimes it would be a little bit too like accurate to my experience. And I'm like, darn, dude, like, do I really have this? And there was a lot of years when I was doing that, when I was like joking around saying, oh, haha, I have ADHD. And then I really took a test. And every time I took a test, it was like frequent, frequent, frequent. Oh no, you know? And, but it was really like hard for me to actually like, you know, do that with, you know, like, and then when it became the part where it was like, now I know that I have it, I don't know how other people feel. And I needed to have that kind of measuring bar. So if you're ever dealing with, you know, if you ever think that you might be dealing with a mental disorder or any kind of mental illness, and maybe you're not ready to go necessarily talk to somebody about it, there is so much information out there. YouTube has a bunch of TED Talks and people talking about their experiences. And that's a way, you know, that you can kind of measure what you're dealing with. Because some things are just, you know, are things that your anxiety a lot of the time around mental illness breeds. Sometimes people can be so afraid of something that that fear of it makes an issue out of itself. You know what I mean? So I think definitely think, you know, as you're going into this kind of journey, if you feel like you're dealing with something like that, you know, it's always good to reach out. But there also is a lot of, you know, research out there, you know, things like that, you know, and I definitely don't want to give nobody homework or anything like that. But I definitely, you know, want to say that, you know, if you ever have any issues, or, you know, if you feel like you're lacking in that access, you know, we're, you know, any peer educator on campus is willing to help you out and reach out and even talk about our own experiences. So definitely, you know, if anyone's listening, just kind of really hope you know that you're not alone. Definitely is what I'm trying to say. I think that's the thing about trivialization, is that it can make it a lonely feeling. It can make it feel like it's just you. And I know for me, when I was, you know, when I was like, I'm going through my own like life and my own track, I definitely want that more. Is like realize, is feeling like I'm real. If that makes any sense. Because, you know, but, you know, definitely, I just want to like kind of take us back to the middle.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, like, how do you think that, like, what are some positive ways that really that you think we can kind of treat this kind of topic, you know, in terms of trivialization? How can we really approach mental illness, especially on social media primarily, but also just in life? Like, what's a good way?
I think the main thing that we've been touching back and forth with is about like educating people. And what you said about previously, like we were talking about norms and how people are expected to act a certain way. So I feel like that's an important thing to recognize and to try to overcome, because a lot of people like to focus on just the outside, if you know what I mean, like just the outside appearance of a person, and they don't want to like understand or see or have that dialogue to understand how complex a person is. And I feel like when we're going back to ADHD or even just eating disorders or body image issues, I feel that it's important to educate people when it comes to the fact that having a mental illness is not fun. It's not something that should be romanticized, and it's hard. It's hard to live life with a mental health illness. It's hard to live with ADHD. It's hard to have somebody that you really love have ADHD, because it's just hard to navigate that in a person's life. And it's also hard to navigate just the fact that an eating disorder literally changes not just their physical appearance, but their mental, like their mental wire up, how they think about themselves, how they function overall. And I feel like that can go for any type of mental health disorder, which is like depression or anxiety. It hinders how somebody functions in the real world. And I feel like it's important to teach in order to normalize and prevent trivialization. It's important to teach people that you have to educate yourself. You have to learn, you have to listen. I think listening is the big factor, because I know that for me, I've never been able to speak freely. Nobody has put in the effort to listen to me, to listen to the things I was dealing with when I did have an eating disorder. So I just feel like it's important to just listen and to learn, basically.
Yeah, no, like that was really great. And definitely, I feel you on that. And I think a thing that you were kind of heading towards is just also just being real in your experience, in the way that you approach yourselves and the way that you approach others. I think that it's important to recognize the truth that lies in all people. And whenever you're, say like you might be advocating, or you're trying to understand, like the other side of it. Maybe you're a mental health advocate and you're trying to figure out how to fight for these people and things like that. And how do these, it honestly is just comes down to representing your personal experience and what it really is in reality. I always, like I have this kind of phrase that I was always rolling with the past couple of years, but it's always important. And I think it's true that you should invite other people around you to live in their truth so that you can live in yours. I think an important part of dealing with people is recognizing that their experiences are real too, you know? And I think that we should always, going forward, is to encourage authenticity, especially on social media, because social media is just a bunch of, filters and things like that, that I think if we truly want to provide a positive atmosphere, especially on APU campus, or just, going forward, I think something that would help a lot of it is just being honest, being real, and being open. And I think that's a lot of it has to do with just having grace with each other, trusting each other. I think a lot of the times, especially for people of color, it's hard for us to trust other people, especially when it comes to stuff like this, where we're vulnerable about it. But I definitely think that as we continue to do this work, and you're right, as we continue to teach ourselves, and the next generation teaches, I think hopefully that's going to place that we're going to be able to get to, is just the ability to have everyone feel like their experience is real. And definitely that. But honestly, I really love this conversation. I think it was great. I really liked it a lot. So, I want to thank you guys for listening online. Thank you, Rae, for talking for so long and listen to me say my tangents. But yeah, today we just want to kind of talk about the trivialization and romanticization. So I definitely, hope everyone has a good day. If anyone has any questions about mental health, like I said, you can always reach out to a peer educator on campus. You can always reach out to the UCC as well. There's a lot of great services, a lot of great options for you. And so, yeah, I just hope everyone goes off and has a, really good Wednesday, has a blessed day, and, happy Wellness Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then also before we end, I also wanted to promote some services from the University Counseling Center. If you ever feel like you are struggling to deal with your situation, or just the fact that you need someone to talk to, the University Counseling Center does offer some resources. And we also do offer an online screening, which does screen for eating disorders, but unfortunately, they're still working on the ADHD one. So if you ever are curious and want to screen yourself, you can always go to that link that's in our bio. And then also, we do offer some group therapy if you are more comfortable. And we do offer a bunch of different types of groups. We do have a person of color group, and then also women's group. But then we also do have workshops that help you cope differently. And some workshops examples that we have are learning to thrive workshops, or even just an anxiety toolbox workshop. And I strongly urge you to take those workshops to help you cope better and to live efficiently. So, okay.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye.